Anyway, I'm Andy Hasson, Superintendent of Schools, and I appreciate those of you who could be here today, so thank you very much. Really, our goal here is just to kind of share a little bit of the planning that our committee has been doing. We've had a recovery team that's been in operation since last year, that's been meeting, talking about things, and then we've had a committee since I took over as the superintendent to look at how we're spending our ESSER funds and how we've been looking through them. So a little of this will be a history lesson of some of what is ESSER, and we'll go through that a little bit, and how we got to where we are, talk about our strategic plan, and then leave some room at the end. So we just went over that. So our strategic plan, as I said, our recovery team started meeting last year and still really worked through. It was quite a large group with community members, teachers, administrators, and board members. And the whole point was to help guide our direction as we emerged through the pandemic. And it was actually required by the state that we actually have a recovery plan. So the two coupled together were really helpful. So one of the things that came out of there was our mission. And as we started really looking at it, we realized that, Yep.
You mentioned several folks on your committee. You did not mention community, students, and parents. Were there?
Yes, I said there were community.
Part of this plan?
Yes, community and parents were invited to be a part of this plan.
What about students?
We did put it out to students. We didn't have any students who opted to be a part of it since I've been involved. So prior, when this began last year, I was not in the planning stages of it.
Do you mean higher level students like high school students and honor students?
Correct.
I think there was some intent to be made, but there was a between Mr. Pratt's leaving and Mr. Ross's coming. There was a fair amount of churn of participants. I don't remember who was in it at the beginning, but I think there were a couple of students that at least initially showed up and decided this was not for them.
I hope you consider in the future.
Yeah, now I continue to keep asking students to be involved, and whenever we put out any of our surveys, we include our students in those surveys. So our mission, we realized that one of the things that we really were lacking was some direction of knowing what we're doing. So we put this out a few times, but kind of really settled on Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union Schools are committed to partnering with our community to ensure growth and inspire lifelong learning for each and every student. And that took some time to get through for folks to kind of just really talk about that individualization. That was probably the largest piece of that. Our core values, community, preservation, perseverance, probably me, sorry. Preservation too is really important. Respect, cooperation, and safety. And I think the safety piece has kind of raised its head even more in light of the last few weeks. Our promise. We promise to engage, educate, and prepare all students to become self-directed learners and creative problem solvers. And so again, I think a lot of the work that the groups were doing was looking at how do we individualize for students. So these were sent out a little while ago, but just one of the things with the recovery plan was to really try and come up with 3 bucket areas, as the state used to call them, surrounding how are we going to approach academic achievement, how are we going to engage students, and then how are we going to address social emotional learning. And so the work we really did was coming up with the idea that 100% of our students will demonstrate grade level proficiency in reading and math by 3rd grade and maintain consistent growth toward grade level goals through graduation as measured by state and grade appropriate local assessments. And that's a lofty goal. But we believe that we can't set the bar any lower. And that was where we really kind of wrestled with that, is how do you say 90%? That means we're leaving 10% behind. We're saying that 10% aren't going to be on grade level. And we believe every student needs to be on grade level. We need to have that lofty goal. Engagement, that all schools will achieve 95% attendance rate, while 100% of the students will show growth toward grade level appropriate engagement in learning as measured through our behavior data and our climate surveys. Again, we believe in lofty goals, that we're going to have every student who's involved in our schools. And through social emotional learning, through an effective implementation of a common approach to community building, 100% of our students and families will report feeling safe, seen, and heard as measured by our data and our classroom observations and family surveys. We don't, again, want to leave one student behind. We want every student to know that they're important and that they will be heard and be a part of our community. So, and with such a small group, if you guys want to just ask questions as we go along, please do. So our theory of action, and a theory of action is like the hypothesis of what do we think is going to happen here. This is kind of our, our action. And we believe that every student in Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union will become a self-directed learner and creative problem solver, allowing each student to to reach full potential with the capacity to choose from multiple pathways of success. And we believe this will happen if all school staff collaborate with family and community members to equitably increase engagement, learning, and personal growth. And I think you can see there's a lot of common language that's happening throughout all of these. So jumping into what is ARP ESSER, what is ESSER? So ARP stands for the American Recovery Plan. And so that is the large stimulus federal package. And ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Plan. And as an SU, we received over $20 million in 3 separate grants. And so our first one was ESSER 1. We received just over $1.4 million. And the purpose of ESSER 1 was to prepare, prevent, and respond to COVID. That grant sunsets on September 30th of the coming September, so the 22nd, or 2022. We have spent most of that grant. We spent a lot of it doing things of buying PPEs, getting our schools clean during that time. That money came out right at the beginning. We did a lot of upgrades with our food service so that the food service folks could prepare meals when our kids were home. And we were able to offer those meals. So we spent a lot of the money working on that piece. ESSER 2, which was $5.8 million. We're still currently working with that grant. It goes through September 30th of 2023. That grant is specifically designed for loss of learning and reopening of schools, but it also encompasses everything from ESSER 1. And so we've used that money to run our summer school programming. We've used that money to, I'm going to draw a blank now with some of the other things. But I'll have to come back to it. I apologize. I drew a blank.
After school is a big one.
After school programming, summer programming. We've hired some staffing with interventionists. which we've used for Zendens, and Zendens are kind of when a student is dysregulated. We found that many of our students, because they were home for a year, coming back into the school setting has been really challenging for them, and so having to just, to a place where they can go, reboot, and then get back to the classroom has been an advantage. We piloted that at Central. It's been a big hit. We're going to be replicating that at our other buildings next year. And then the ARP ESSER, or ESSER 3, it's also referred to. The main pieces is loss of learning, which are those 3 buckets of academic success, engagement, and social emotional learning, but also infrastructure. And currently, that grant is supposed to go through September 30th of 2024. However, I've not seen anything official, that it may get extended to 2026. Mostly due to the fact that a lot of construction is being delayed at this time. So how are we looking at, yep. Sure, sorry. Let me go back. Yeah, thank you. So that grant, I don't have, that is just over $13 million. So I apologize. I'll add that to the slides so that we'll publish these slides. So thank you. So with loss of learning, we had to set aside, the requirement from the state was that we set aside 20% of that $13 million from that final grant. Had to be set aside to address loss of learning. And so as a committee, we started looking at how can we effectively use that money to really impact the loss of learning our kids have had and really change the instructional practices we have here in the SU. So one of the things we looked at is a director of innovation and instruction, someone to come in, work with our teachers, and really look at our curriculum and how can we change what we're doing or enhance what we are doing for our students. Also a multi-tiered systems of support coordinator, and that's a person who will work directly with staff and with administration to understand the data that we collect with a lot of our assessment tools. But how are we using that data to change our instruction, right? So we test kids, we test them a lot, but then what do we do with that data? What do we choose to do with it? And what does it tell our teachers? And then how do our teachers change their instruction so that they can meet the needs of kids? Also after school programming and summer school programming, to continue that. We've found that we ran it this last year, we're going to be running it again this year, and looking to continue it. Through ESSER funds, we're able to offer it free of charge to all of our students. We find it's coupled, it's academics in the morning typically, and then some light engagement. The kids will go swimming and stuff like that, but we're trying to couple it with some different things. Responsive classroom training. A responsive classroom is our universal approach to, it's that common language that all of our teachers and staff are using when talking with students. And really the idea with the responsive classroom is that we're spending the first 6 weeks really teaching kids the norms and the expectations that we have so that we can address learning after that. Curriculum development, spending time doing curriculum development, Zenden classrooms, as I spoke of, and then data collection software. One of the things we realized is, like I said, we get a lot of data through SBAC testing, MAPS testing. We do DIBBLES, we do PNOAs, and there's a lot more acronyms that we come up with in education. But all that data just sits in all these different areas. And so the idea of bringing all that data together so that we can effectively use it. And then also, we've heavily invested in the last few years in restorative practices. And we found that investment is starting to pay off in building our community within each building. And restorative practices is not void of consequences, but it's repairing that harm, so that if a student is acting up in class, we have the opportunity to bring groups together to kind of understand how my behavior might be affecting the whole larger group. And that then, the whole point is to reduce suspensions and whatnot. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain in more detail curriculum development?
Yeah, so
Is
that
that a position that someone hired to look at all the curriculum and change it? Or explain it to us.
yeah, so curriculum development is, that was a catch-all phrase because there's stipends in there for teachers to come in and do work with the Director of Innovation and Instruction on looking at our current curriculum. How are we offering that curriculum? What needs to be modified? What needs to be enhanced? What needs to be changed? So it's not just it's not a person, it's just the work we're going to do to address our curriculum. Look at, what are we offering? So currently right now with our ELA, our English language, we are using Fontes and Pinnell as our baseline for reading. And we need to go back and look at, is that everything we have? Do we need more? We know through research that Fontes and Pinnell has some holes. And so how do we fill those holes so that we can address the learning that goes on with students? With mathematics, the approach that we're taking to math, is it an approach that's going to be effective for all students? And the curriculum that we're offering at Westminster, we want it to be the exact same curriculum that we're offering at Central Elementary, or that we're offering at Saxons River, or that we're offering at Grafton, so that our curriculum is aligned, and then that curriculum is also not only horizontally aligned, but is vertically aligned. So what we're doing in 4th grade is going to feed into what they're doing in 5th grade, and what they're doing in 8th grade is going to feed into what they're doing in 9th grade. So it's vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. I'm sorry? Yes, it would be research-based, yes. So this is work that hasn't happened yet. This is work that we would be doing in the future. With infrastructure, out of that $13 million, we're looking at spending roughly $5.5 million on improving our current infrastructure. That involves HVAC systems at all of our buildings and where they're needed. This building alone is a $2 million project to upgrade the HVAC system. And so also the kitchen at Central Elementary School is the one kitchen that has never been upgraded. And it needs, we've upgraded using other ESSER funds, our other kitchens, so we're looking at upgrading that. Upgrading our camera and our door systems, looking at our locks, but also looking at our security systems with our cameras. How are they integrated into our buildings, but how are they also similar across our SU? So that the system that's out in Grafton is the same system we're using at the high school, because we need to be able to support all those different systems. There's a proposal to upgrade this auditorium and actually to put in some dividers so that we could break this space up into smaller spaces as we hopefully don't have to with COVID, but the whole idea with COVID is how can you take your spaces and use them differently? So that's one of the proposals. Excuse me, there's some work at Westminster with some of the circulation pumps and the ductwork there. Repairing the roofs at all of our buildings that need repair. And some of them are minor. In some areas, some are ones that haven't been addressed in a few years. So we're looking at trying to address those pieces. Some of them are major renovations. The water tank at Saxons River Elementary School, we found out, unfortunately, when we had a sprinkler leak there earlier this year, that the tank also needs some work addressing it, so we can utilize the ESSER funds to address that. Looking at upgrading windows and doors. The grant doesn't allow us to change out all the windows, but we can strategically look at where are windows that are having air leaks, and we're not being able to create a full envelope for our air quality. Also, the playground at Grafton. One of the things we know with ESSER funds, we always have to find a COVID relation. So how are we responding to COVID, or how are we addressing COVID? We know that outdoor areas are important so that kids are out of the building and they're able to spread out. We know outdoor play is really important. And also some of the water damage at Grafton. Those are some of the bigger projects. There's other little projects that kind of squeak in, and we add those as we go.
Andy, does HVAC work include air conditioning?
Yes, depending on the areas that don't need it. So the project here, because we've gotten approval for the project here. So the way ARP funds work is you send up and ask for concept approval. So here's an idea. Let me send it up to the state. They tell us, yeah, we like that idea. That fits in. So now that you've been approved for concept approval, you can start moving forward on going out to bid to get contractors and do permitting and stuff like that. But hold off, don't start any work, send it back up for project approval. So once you send it back up for project approval, then you come back and they give you, once you've got project approval, then you can actually start work. So, so with the HVAC system here, we got concept approval. We're working on now getting the bids, but part of that approval, the way we wrote it, was for any air conditioning that would go into it. So,
Do you plan to do that with the other buildings?
yes, yeah.
Andy, do you expect us to ask questions about infrastructure now, or do you want us to?
Either way, whatever works for you guys.
So it seems to me that the $5,463,480 is a very specific number. Is that based on a percentage of the total, or is that based on a sum of all the projects that you have in mind?
No, so that's not based on a total sum. The other point is, the next slide is $5 million towards a new initiative project. So when you take the 5 million, you take the 20% for loss of learning, you've got the 4.4 left over.
The 5.
Or the 5.4, pardon me, yes. So that's the reason where that dollar amount comes from. But there's some fluidity there.
And the 2 million is already has been approved, has received concept
Nope.
approval.
Yes, the 2 million for the HVAC system at the high school has got concept approval. No money has been spent.
Right, but essentially there's $3.5 million left.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to fully disclose that I'm from Grafton, so I'm going to have a specific interest in the Grafton project. What is your process for coming up with this list? How is the community going to be engaged in adding to this list?
So we put out a couple of times asking people for feedback, but we're going to need to, maybe have smaller pieces at each school. So that will probably be the next piece of looking at how do we go out to Grafton and have a very candid conversation about Grafton. How do we go to Westminster and have a candid conversation about Westminster? Some of what happened was, upon taking over, had learned that principals had been told that they would get a percentage of the total cost or the total award based on their student population. And when you get into how ESSER is supposed to be used, that is not how it's supposed to be used. It's how the community at large sees the greatest needs within their community. And so it becomes disproportionate in that sense, but it also gives, like, if there's a need out in Grafton for something, we can take monies and earmark it that might be above that student percentage. So Yes, ma'am.
I do want to correct you on the upgrades to the kitchenette in the elementary school. You stated there was never an upgrade. There was. They upgraded that whole building probably 12, 15 years ago. And that whole kitchen was done. Extra the school was. So you know.
I was told it was just the kindergarten wing.
So we were informed that only the kindergarten wing was the upgrade. That,
There were some classrooms that were changed a little bit, but it was just the new wing, and then there were some additional pieces. They did like the floors in a few classrooms, but there were coat hooks that were added to the classrooms. But as far as I know, the kitchen was never upgraded.
I can defer to Mr. Kibbe and ask this, because I think he was around during that time.
You're correct, it was very minimal work done on the kitchen in Central. I wouldn't say that nothing was done, but that it really wasn't part of the project.
Okay.
There have been some improvements since then. There have to do with equipment.
Yeah, So in answer to why is it $5.4 million, when our committee started meeting and we started talking about how could we use these funds to have the greatest impact on our students for years to come. And the conversation started to evolve a little bit. The preschool used to exist up at Cherry Hill when we occupied the building up on Cherry Hill. And when we moved to our new location, it's a little smaller, and we don't have the space for the preschool. And so the preschool had to move and was incorporated into Central Elementary School. And the classroom, we converted a classroom that was that pre-existed there, but it's not designed for littles. And then we're doing the same thing at Westminster, where we've taken a classroom and converted it, and it's really not designed for the littles. And as we started our conversation more of, number one, we already knew that wasn't the best ideal location for preschool. How could we really, really impact and change the trajectory of many of our students that we're seeing coming into our buildings not ready for school? We're seeing kindergartners who aren't even ready for preschool. We're seeing our second graders who are distributing or displaying kindergarten-like behavior. And so we know that kids are not getting that direct instruction that they need at a very, very young age. And we know from the research that if we invest at that young age, the gain back is up to $17 for every dollar invested at that young age. And so the other piece was we looked at how can we potentially save some additional funds throughout the SU. We currently pay $45,000 a year in lease for the central office. And so if we could combine these two ideas, we potentially could save the SU quite a bit of funds in the long run. And so we started really having this conversation about an early childhood learning center in central office. And originally the conversation started with 66 Atkinson Street, because we knew that was a space that might be available. And as we really started planning, it really wasn't a conducive space. And then the community garden project came along, and that seemed to be a great location. And so we started kind of talking about, well, could it fit here on the high school grounds? Because there's quite a bit of land here on the high school grounds. And then could we incorporate curriculum with our classrooms here and our students could start accessing and doing some of our work-based learning that we want to do, but also incorporating some of our work from our sociology classes and from our psychology classes, and do some pre-work for kids who might be interested in going into early learning, or into nursing of some kind. So we really started seeing an opportunity for that growth for our students. And we started having a conversation about how we can increase nature-based and outdoor classrooms and learning. Again, knowing that kids learn best sometimes when they apply what they learn in a classroom outside. But also with COVID, how do we get them outside and get them playing out there? How do we get them into that exploratory learning at a very young age? So what we came up with was an opportunity to create 2 infant classrooms, 2 toddler classrooms, and 4 preschools. And as we started looking at the research, right now we operate 2 preschools, and they're not full-time. They alternate on days for the most part. And we started saying, how many kids? We found that there's almost a dozen to 2 dozen kids on waiting lists in our own community for childcare right now. And that means that those parents are not able to get back to work. So we looked at how can we make this coupled effect of getting parents back to work, getting that quality care for kids, and expanding our opportunities. And so I think I've covered everything on there. So when we started doing a cost analysis, and this is really, again, so this went up to the state, we got concept approval on it. So all we've gotten is this like, yeah, we like that concept, go ahead and do some more research for us. So we did we started doing some preliminary stuff, and again, we know there'd be a $45,000 reduction if this was to be built. But we also were looking at that this would be a tuition-based system. So it's not a free public school. This would be a tuition-based. It would be coupled with the already 10 hours of universal pre-K that is offered to all families. But families would have to pay up for the other part. We're also looking at, there are some possibilities, and it's still a very long shot, that there might be the ability to couple with some grant funding at the federal level that could help support staffing and additional curriculum for many years into the future. So, and in that, because we'd be putting it here at the high school, what we had put in that proposal to the federal application was the possibility of upgrading the driveway and the parking lot here at the high school, knowing that it would all be incorporated and needed to be involved. So that was some of the purpose of looking at that. It starts to get a little small, but I'll try and figure it out. Part of it also is that currently much of what is for staffing is covered through reimbursements through Medicaid. Through special education, when they provide some of their services, legally we're allowed to collect Medicaid reimbursement. That Medicaid reimbursement comes back into the district. It cannot be used in special education, so it goes into the general fund. The SU years ago earmarked it for pre-K to help fund pre-K. And so that already supports quite a bit of staff. As I said, there's 10 hours a week of universal pre-K. And then when we started looking at what would we need, for a proposed new spending, it came out to about $562,000, and that's staffing for a coordinator, an outreach coordinator, another teacher, and additional support staff that's needed, again, for 2 infant rooms, 2 toddler rooms, and 4 preschool rooms. And that's based on the current model from DCF that dictates the number of staffing you need to have. So as we looked at averages across the state and what the state average is and what tuition would be, we were looking at, for infants, it would be about $1,000 a month. We could take up to 16 kids. And so we're looking at $160,000 that we would be able to generate from revenue. And this is just based on 10 months. You can expand it out for 12 years, but we looked at the school year. For toddlers, the average is $900 a month. Again, you go up in students, so you have a total of, the 20 students. So we're talking about $180,000 that we'd be generating. And then with pre-K, with the 4 classrooms, we could generate up to $280,000. Try and do the quick math. It's just over $600,000 in revenue that we could generate, which would offset the cost for the additional staffing that we would need. So, we feel that just looking at the initial proposal that we could fund this at zero cost to taxpayers or minimal cost to taxpayers as we look at planning that out. So I just wanted to share a little bit. This is a word cloud. We put out a thought exchange. So we partnered with Thought Exchange, which is an online platform that basically allows us to do focus groups online and not do surveys, but actually just kind of generate thoughts from parents and community members and students and staff. And so when we ask them, what do you think we should do with our funds? These are the words that people put in as their thoughts. So the computer started to generate where are they seeing the most hits. And so you can see that mental health was probably our biggest area. That the majority of people who responded said mental health is the most important thing. And then well-being, emotions, struggling. So you can see as they pan out where people felt that was important. But it's just an interesting way that the computer kind of generates some thoughts or words. And then this is the common theme. So again, the computer takes those, what are people saying, and looks at where are those common themes. And you can see that the biggest one is mental health, again. And then high access, right? Access to school, access to services. Learning and support and kids learning. So those are our big major themes that we're trying to work through. And then as we got into, these are just some thoughts that people put in, and I consolidated them down just a bit because some of them were lengthy. But mental health, student well-being, number 1. But help for students on IEPs and 504s. How do we meet the needs of all learners? Provide more opportunities at the middle school level. Foreign language, cooking, shop classes. That was a large one. Professional development for dealing with students with anxiety, depression, ADHD, right? Personalize. How do we personalize our learning for those students? Update infrastructure, counseling for students' mental health, expanding outdoor learning, experiential learning, thank you, getting tongue-tied. Support learning loss, increase our range of course offerings for all students, not just for AP kids, not just for IEP kids. How are we hitting all of our kids? How are we getting them engaged? And then trauma-informed practices and restorative practices. So these were the major themes that kind of popped up, or major thoughts that people were having. So that's all I have in talking, but I can answer more questions, go back on things.
Could you explain more about Zen?
So Zenden's probably had, I'm trying to think how many years I've been in education. It's had many different names. Reboot Room is one. Calm Down Space. We had, trying to think of the one we had in Los Angeles, where when I worked, like you had a place so if a student was acting up, you could send them to a space where they could collect themselves. So I guess the basis of is students self-regulate. So when we talk about all those things that we talked about, when we get down to personalization, what you really want is a student to be able to say, I'm off right now. And I need, like, being in the classroom right now is overstimulating me. And if I stay in this space, I might now make a poor choice. And if I make that poor choice, I'm going to end up with a consequence. So I'm going to self-regulate, and may I please go down to the Zen den, collect myself, and come back. And really, it's about that self-regulation. But a teacher can also say, you know what, Cheryl, I think you might need to have like a timeout. We used to call them timeouts, right? And stuff like that. So it's just a nicer word for it, but, sorry?
I said euphemism of the week.
Yes, yeah.
Andy, one of the things that I think will be a concern long-term about the early ed program, and the benefit is that, again, when you look at studies of young parents, housing prices, access to bandwidth, if they want to work remotely, but right after housing prices is access to child care. So this is a community, if we do this successfully, it's one of those community growth strategies, because you really want to attract young parents into the community. Finding child care for them is right there. We win in terms of low housing prices, do pretty well in terms of internet access, but we're no better than anybody else in terms of waiting for, fighting to find child care. So if we can solve that, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I have currently I think I have close to 6 staff who are unable to work this year because they could not find childcare.
Well,
So,
if we're looking to, regrow our community, regrow our student population in the schools, this is a path to get here. The question I have, and people should know that the Grafton folks, that already are on this committee, on the finance committee, and folks in investments, will be Cheryl's on it, and people that in Rockingham should be happy to know that Chase and Chris Kibbe are on it, and the people that are United people going through this actually all works. The question I have is, fee for service in a public setting, is that a sustainable model, and how do we deal with, what's the thought about the folks who are, we're going to need some help in order to cover that, because over 5 years from K to from infancy to 5, that's like $50,000. And how they, are we thinking about how we're going to help swing that? Is that going to be a sort of step to the process?
yeah, I think that's in the initial conversation. That was some of, could the support from the federal level provide some of that, so that might help offset those costs. Looking at additional funding grants in the future that might be able to help with that. I don't know, Jennifer, how are families able to access right now?
Vermont has a child care subsidy system, and families who need child care in order to work can access subsidy through an income-based system, and it doesn't cover the entire piece of childcare, but it covers quite a bit. And the subsidy amounts that come in from the state are higher. There's a quality rating system for childcare called STARS, and the more stars a program has, the higher the subsidy amounts are. So it incentivizes families to seek out high quality childcare.
Presumably we'll have all the stars.
I mean, then, yes, I believe we will. So that families can get child care subsidy. You have to look at it, it's the income thing, and it's if you're working during childcare hours, or if you work at night, if you're sleeping, or you're in school. So there's sort of these several layers, and then the state helps pay for the childcare, which is great, and that's how a lot of families do it. It's still an expensive thing, and that's the numbers that were there were preliminary. I think it's an invaluable conversation. One of Andy said 6 staff members aren't here. We work with someone who has a 1-year-old, and that child is in infant care, and her family pays $1,200 a month. And because mom and dad's income is what it is, I didn't ask, I'm assuming they don't get subsidy, because he said they pay $1,200 a month for their infant care, which is a lot.
Anyway, just,
Right.
because I know people are going to want to shape
Right.
this to see if it
Right.
provides the services needed, and if this is it's an innovation, whether we can,
Yes.
whether we manage to sustain it.
Yes, I think that it's an important question, and I think, I mean, in public school, I haven't done anything fee for service either, but we have a business office, and we have, like you said, the Green Eye Shake people, and the goal is to get our families in, and we're going to work on that if this gets project approval and the community is behind it.
Chris?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Jack, and, but we have access, subsidy, and also fees for programs. For instance, in Westminster, in the after-school program, that was how that program was sustained. So it's certainly very doable. But there's, of course, an administrative piece to it, around billing and all that. But that's part, presumably, of the plan.
Right. No, part of why, people here on that is to explain it to the rest of my board members and the community at large. I know the numbers are there. It's going to take some explaining technical to get those numbers.
Please.
Andy, a couple of questions regarding the Early Child Learning Center. I think it's a wonderful concept. Is the entire $5 million designated for new construction associated with this project?
Correct.
Okay, and I would encourage you to consider a 12-month program from the outset, because we have 2 parallel objectives of preparing young people for a classroom and helping families stay at work. They really need 12 months. Data show that if kids stop their early learning, even during the summer, it really falls short, and they go back to school in September with a disadvantage.
So on the second part, yeah, we talked about that just for this presentation. We put up, because typically our teachers are on a 10-month contract, and so we were using the numbers we had from them to project a teacher out, how they would be paid over those 2 other, it would change the contract a little bit, and so we would get more into the weeds of trying to figure it out, but it's one of the things Jennifer has said to me time and time again, we can't base it on 10 months, it has to be year-round, it has to be, and it has to be beyond what we currently offer in childcare, or in pre-K. Pre-K ends at 1:30. We need to go longer.
Right.
And so we're not talking, these are full days that we're talking about. So, but you were going to say something about the $5 million.
The $5 million is also for the central office building. So it's a central office building and pre-K. And whether it's
No.
no.
Oh, the $5
So,
million is not?
no, the $5 million is for a plant, a physical plant. So what we're hoping is if we can couple it with a federal grant that's working its way through, potentially, and that's a long shot. I want to, that what we were asked, we were approached and asked to see if we would be interested in this. And so we were looking at, hey, well, we have ESSER funds that can help out. Can you help out with these other projects that we need done? And so therefore, as that's working its way through, I believe, I want to say that the whole proposal is like a lot more. I mean, I mean, the number's kind of escaping me right now, but like the parking lot alone is $2 million. So, and it's just, the other part is one of the first things I asked the state as I got involved here was because I kept hearing about the parking lot here and it needs repair, and the state kind of laughed at me. They said there's no COVID connection, you know, and they said, yeah, I don't care how well you want to spin and use your creative writing degree, it's not going to work. And so, you know, so we're going to have to continue to look at some other funds for the parking lot. It needs to be addressed here, so it's not a, it's, you know, and I think there are some other avenues that folks are looking at. So,
I also wanted to say something else about the 10 months and 12 months. Andy's right. It needs to be 12 months, and it probably needs to be after 3:30. The staffing numbers were based on the school year, and in the summer, the staffing numbers wouldn't have to be the same. You wouldn't have to have a licensed teacher in the preschool rooms. For the universal pre-K law, we have to have licensed teachers in preschool rooms at least 10 hours a week. So in the summer, we could run it with non-licensed teachers, so therefore the cost is a little bit less, but the revenue amount per month would be the same. So, but that was a lot of weeds for the slides.
You're looking at the ratio for all of these?
Yes, of course we
Yeah.
will.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's worth people understanding that there is a hidden benefit and that economic one. If this is not an educational program, an economic development program, and I'm praying that it is, every single student comes into this place used to, beyond the current population, it's basically a $20,000 check from the state. Now, that's important to know because the reality is that most of our classes these days have very small classes. Sounds good. They have them because we don't have population. We really could increase pretty much across the board student populations by as much as a third without really impacting teacher costs significantly. So literally every new family, you bring in these 4 towns, every new family we bring in these 4 towns is $20,000 to $40,000, maybe more. So if you bring families here because finally it's a place where they don't have to worry about access to data, it's here, it's a bite. So we can recover the cost. But if they come here, that's all additional money in addition to everything else. Because if I have 8 kids in that algebra class as opposed to 6, it doesn't cost me any more in terms of teachers. And that's a very big deal in schools that, in the school system that's lost close to half the student population in the last 20 years. It dramatically drops the cost of education, dramatically gives us abilities to do things just out of current revenue, and the program will largely, I believe, pay for itself. Out of that, we were doing nothing else. So,
I think also, and I'll admit I have 2 ulterior motives. One, as Act 173 looms on our horizon, which is going to reduce the amount of revenue we get from the state for special education grant, and that'll project over years to come. So we're going to be receiving less money from the state to help offset our education for students who are identified as having learning needs. That if we can address those learning needs early on, we can potentially reduce our special education population as students go up, because we know that the majority of kids that go into special education go in around second grade. So therefore, if we're addressing their learning needs early on, we can address it. Early special education was originally designed to do just that. Unfortunately, what happens is a lot of kids stay on IEPs early on. So if we can really get in there and affect that learning, the long-term effect is to reduce that special education population. The second one is kind of on where you're talking about with economic development. All of our students who go through our schools will be in our community. If we're not educating our students to be lifelong learners and to be productive citizens and be self-sufficient, then we're going to be paying on the other end. And so therefore the investment becomes that long-term payout at the end. So those have always been my two ulterior motives in looking into this. The third one is just exactly what you're saying, is how can we stimulate to draw more people in, to draw more business in, so that we can offset the costs. So.
Can you give us an idea of what the numbers of our population of students are in each of the buildings?
Ooh, off the top of my head.
Restate the question too, I don't think.
So the question was, what's the current population of our students in each building? So I'm going to try. I got some of the principals here, so maybe they can help me. So Grafton Elementary is about 39. Saxon's River, 77. I was going to go with 75. I'll go with 77. Central Elementary is 152. Westminster is 155. I wanted to say 160. So 155. The middle school is, there's about 200 and, okay, I was going to say 230, because there's a big class that's moving up to the high school. And then the high school is just over 300, maybe about 330.
And our pre-K?
And pre-K, yeah.
We have 33 students in the public pre-K, and your school districts pay tuition to private programs for 66 more.
So that brings our population, who's doing the math, was just over 1,000 total, a little over 1,000, about 1,030. So at full capacity, 4 classrooms, I'm going to start backwards, 4 classrooms can take.
The 66 was the number.
The preschool rooms, I'm calling full at 14 each, so that's 40, 56. And the toddler rooms are 2 rooms of 12.
Okay.
It's 24, so 66 plus 24, 76, 86, 90. And then infants, the rooms are full at 8, so it was 2 rooms of 8, 16.
So roughly over 100.
Right.
That's still using the other buildings, not just.
Oh, and I don't, I don't know about the other
The current
private
classroom?
programs.
Oh, the private programs, right.
We would have the ability with the Early Childhood Learning Center to take students from other communities. We currently our public sites, we only take children from our districts. Mm-hmm. But if we opened up and had lots and lots of spaces, a student from Brattleboro whose family worked here could come to our community could go to our early learning center. Their school district would pay the UPK money, the 10 hours, and the family would pay what's left.
And we know of families that are traveling from Springfield down to Brattleboro for care.
I know of families, that center I mentioned that one of our staff members uses for their infant. This staff member was sharing that there's families from Greenfield who drive their infant up from Greenfield to have quality childcare in Brattleboro. People, there's not a lot of infant slots around, so.
Any other questions? Please.
Questions not regarding to that, but I've done FEMA paperwork for the town of Grafton, and a lot of the federal funds require within only 90%. Does this pay the full 100% of your project?
Yes. Yes, 100% of all projects that are approved.
Because I'm also, I have a child at the Grafton Elementary School, and I'm talking about replacing the playground. Is the only project that you sent in for Grafton, have you sent any project in for Grafton?
I haven't even gotten the request. I've only been asked if it would be considered, and I asked that we get it as soon as possible.
We had something when Mr. Pratt was here, and it turned out that, let's just say it wasn't not at a point that it represented to us, so this is something that we're going to work on.
But that's where, like, so Ms. Cartier approached me and said, you know, hey, we're looking at this playground thing, how soon do you need it? And I said, just get it to us as soon as possible so we can push it out. So just because things get approved, concept approval, I want to make this very, very clear because this becomes an issue. Just because something gets concept approval doesn't mean you have to move forward with that. So very early on, prior to my tenure, there were some pavilions that were approved, that were concept approved. So these were outdoor pavilions, much like you would see at a park kind of thing, that were approved. But we really hadn't vetted out where they even needed, type of thing. And so as we got into it, the decision was actually not to move forward with those projects, and so we didn't move forward with those projects. So they still sit in the system as approved, so if we ever want to go back, we can move forward with them. But.
We've been playgrounds since August
Right.
last year. We have a few things on our playground. And I missed a couple meetings, but at one point they were going to go ask other organizations to start donating money so we could get a structure for our kids. And to me, if it's supposed to be equitable between all the schools, I feel like let's get this going. Our kids have been a whole.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's the ARP money. So this money, this $13 million, just got, like, you can start coming up with projects in December. So it hasn't been, we haven't had access to this money at all because the state had to get their plan approved. So it put everything on hold. Anyone was looking to use those funds, all those programs and things. And then, again, you push them up for concept approval, and it takes months to get approved at times, so.
I was just going to say, through all of your, the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, from the time it goes from concept to the time that you actually get paid, how long is that? So if we submitted a plan to you next week,
For the playground, let's say, right?
yeah, like when could we expect to see, like, oh, we can order that? Or
I suspect that, I'm speculating here, the way the state runs. They have a group that looks at each one of these concept approvals. So like for this early learning center, I think it took 3 to 4 months. And when I first pushed it up, I got back like, we've never had a proposal like this, we'll have to get back to you. And then it was, tell us more about this, tell us more about this, tell us more about that. And so, but then we had one that was here for the high school that was a circuit breaker that needed to be repaired that was concept approved in 2 weeks. So I think it has to do with the volume of when things go up, because they have a limited staff. But I would suspect that, probably a timeline, concept approval, you're talking probably 2 months, unless they're going to expedite things. And then what we've done with some of the other projects is, even though you got concept approval, you can start working with people, you just can't commit any funds because you don't know you're going to have the funds.
Goes to concept approval, and you actually start looking at contractors and bidding and all of that. How does that work through the SU? Is there a certain number of bidders?
Yep, so we have to do an RFP, we have to put it out there, we have to try and get back 3, right? And if we don't get back 3, then we have to ask for a waiver, that takes longer. But if we get 3 bidders back, then we can move forward on the bidders and then kind of move there. So again, project approval seems to get turned around faster than concept approval. So I would anticipate that we probably, would be looking at the beginning of next school year before we could break ground.
And the playground may really easy on top, because that's what happened, is we started out with the playground, and then ended up becoming this pavilion playground, and then it became this overlap pavilion thing that we were even, that the local board wasn't even apprised of until we read about it in the paperwork. So this is something that we may just have to sit down and fight the bullet and get done, because that's a discussion we have it sooner rather than later this summer.
Because, Andy, didn't you mention that the full 1.4 million in ESSER 1 has not been spent?
No, that's
completely spent.
allocated, it hasn't been fully spent, because we got until September to fully spend it, but it's been fully allocated and approved. We can't make any more adjustments to that grant.
So would the Grafton Elementary School playground fit into ESSER 2?
It could. We still have to go through concept approval. That's the thing. So because of it's a construction project, you still have to go through that approval. So it's a matter of getting what is the proposal like, and honestly what it is, hey, we need a new playground, we think it's going to cost this much. That's what I need for concept approval. And then I can push it out. So, yeah. Anything else? Well, I appreciate those of you who came, and we'll be posting this online for other folks, and looking for more feedback as we move forward. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.